This is episode 28 of Hardly Qualified, Addicted to Happiness, for August 2nd, 2013. Have you ever sat around in a pub and chatted into the wee hours of the night? Ever considered the world in ways you've never before thought about, and then shared it with your friends? Welcome to Hardly Qualified, a weekly podcast recorded in Calgary, Alberta, where Will Connor and his friend Ducky get together to wax philosophical about whatever suits their fancy. With the occasional guest, they discuss society and culture, following random threads of thought wherever they may lead. So pull up a chair, grab a drink, and join the conversation, because you never know, you might be hardly qualified too. Let's get started.
This is Hardly Qualified. I'm William, and you're too damn happy.
At least it wasn't welcome back.
You know, I have to admit that that's getting irritating.
The welcome back?
Yeah.
Finally a convert.
It's I know it's a bit of my signature thing, but I don't know. I just can't do it anymore. I really can't, especially I was listening to the last episode, and you know, Willie's like, "Let's get started," and then I'm like, "Welcome back to Hardly Qualified." And like, yeah, they freaking know that already.
Have you noticed you started doing it in like that weird sort of carny voice? You're like, "Welcome back, everybody."
Well, I was gonna say game show type voice.
Welcome back to Hardly Qualified, my name.
Welcome back to Hardly Qualified. Let's get it on. We're getting on to having some good time tonight.
Oh, it sounded like a Cajun there.
That's what we need to do. We need to do a whole episode where we're like Southern Baptist preachers. And we're going to have some Hardly Qualified. And we're going to raise up our hands and we're going to think about things,
Mm-hmm. You preach it, brother. You preach it. Yeah.
And praise the Sagan. Praise him.
Praise Sagan. Feel the warmth of the knowledge coming into your brain. I feel it. Do you feel it, sister?
Oh my god.
It reminds me, there's a podcast that Seth Andrews did where he was doing a spoof of like a preacher, and it was one of the funniest things I'd ever heard. I can't remember which one it was, but it was from a couple of months ago. I'll see if I can dig it out and give it to Willie so people can listen. But it was hilarious.
See, I could not be part of an episode like that because I would just laugh the whole time. So I'd have to be a listener on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, So hi guys, how are you doing?
What? We good, bro.
We good.
We be happy.
Yeah. So, when do you want to do a Chipmunk episode?
I don't know. We'll talk about that later.
Oh, I want to do this one as a Chipmunk episode.
You want to do? I don't know. This one might be a little. Okay, we'll do this one Chipmunk.
All right.
I don't know what Celine will sound like Chipmunky though.
Oh god. You might want to warn people to mute whenever I'm on if you're doing it Chipmunk style.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, it won't be Chipmunky until after we say,
now we're going Chipmunky. Yeah. So, yeah, otherwise people there's something wrong with it. Yeah. When I was doing the post for last episode, I tried to manually speed it up. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to increase the tempo and I'm going to reduce the pitch and I'm going to just see if I can compress it because we talk so slowly. I'm just like, it doesn't seem like it's that slow when we're recording, but when I'm listening to it at real time, I'm just like, hurry up. Yeah. So I did. That's why I listened to it. I compressed it to 1.5 times, so it was like, 90 minutes. Instead of being 90 minutes long, it was like 62 minutes long or something. And it was all Chipmunky and it was hilarious. And I'm like, yeah, but people don't want Chipmunk. So I reduced the pitch and it was choppy. So somewhere in reducing that pitch is where the, because you know what it's like when your software does the same thing when you're listening to your own podcast, right? Yeah. It sounds like there's little pieces being lost. So. Technology's getting better, but this is like way irrelevant to the people who are listening. They're like, dude, I don't care. I really don't care. I'm just trying to give them some insight into how the podcaster gets made. Well, we're Chipmunky right now, so they're gonna know it. Yeah, so. You've been threatening it for a while, and it's finally happened. Yay, executive decision. Yay. Well, and you know what better episode to do it as the episode where we are addicted to happiness, or at least we talk about how in our culture we are addicted to happiness. This came about because I was reading an article in Skeptic magazine a number of weeks ago. The article, or the issue is like months old, years old, whatever, but there was a couple interesting questions they posed in the magazine. I thought, hey, that makes me do thinking, and I need to talk to Ducky and some other random person about this. And Celine's like, hey, I'll be a random person, so... It makes my brain do the swirly-twirly thing. Yeah. So and okay, so they're like, what is happiness? Well, we're skeptics, so we believe in empiricism, so we don't really know what the fuck skepticism is because...
Happiness.
Thank you.
Well, isn't happiness just simply the release of an endorphin?
Well, is it?
Isn't it?
Is it? One of the things he said is, okay, well, we have no definition as to what happiness is. It's kind of like porn.
Yeah.
We know it when we see it, but we can't define it.
Well, I mean, there are people who will define it. I know that if Bob was here, he would talk about joy and contentment and,
But that's not happiness.
Isn't it, though?
No, those are separate things.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's...
Even if you ask, I'm going to pull the Oprah card here. Even if you ask
Oh,
Oprah,
God.
she will tell you there's a difference between happiness and joy, and that she'd rather be joyful than happy.
Yeah. No, I think there's a big difference between happiness and joy and being ecstatic. And I think even Bob would agree with us on that one. Bob, if you're listening, let us know.
I don't know.
Oh, he's listening. There you go. He mind waved me and he said he agrees. Okay. So... yeah, so we're having way too much fun, but that's okay. The happiness, so they were saying, okay, we don't know what it is, so it's hard to measure, but, there are actually psychologists and psychiatrists and stuff like that do try to measure happiness. Then the other question they posed is, there's actually no real proof that happiness is good for us, or what an appropriate level of happiness is. So the whole article was moving towards this discussion of, in North American culture specifically, not so much the British, because they're happy being miserable. Yeah, Willie, I said it. You're happy being miserable, just admit it. Anyway.
It's so hot. Oh, God, it's so hot. Wang, why is it so hot?
I totally missed that reference, but
That's okay. It's an inside joke with Will, Wang, and I.
Oh. Sorry to the other 1,000 of our listeners for not getting that. Jeez. Alrighty. But, especially in the United States, they're obsessed with happiness. That if you're not happy, then there's something fundamentally wrong with you, and you need to be put on medication and counseling and,
Yeah.
Right? So we seem to have lost this thing where, what's it called? Contentment? Yeah, where it's no longer okay to just be content with life. You have to be happy or you are automatically depressed and need to be treated. And so that's kind of what that article was talking about. And I found that kind of interesting.
It really rings true to me, too, because, I don't know, I'm kind of a sociopath in the sense that I'm unemotional, I guess. I mean...
You get thrills off of other people's misery?
I'm the fruit.
Oh, no, that's psychopath.
Yeah, that's psychopath. No, I seem to, I'm never really happy, but at the same time, I'm never really sad, you know what I mean? I just kind of have this happy medium that I just sit at all the time, and there's occasionally a spike where I'm, really excited or really giddy about something, and, oh man, I can't believe this just happened, oh my god, I'm so great, blah, 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 right? Or other times where I'm like, oh fuck, I can't believe that happened, what's the matter with me, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, it's just like a happy medium, and I just kind of sit at that baseline, I'm not real happy, but I'm not slitting my wrist either, and it just, I've had people comment, they're like, why aren't you happy, right? Like, why are you so miserable? And I'm like, I'm not miserable. Just because I'm not doing jumping jacks and skipping rope and painting, smiles on the flowers doesn't mean that I'm, miserable.
Well, there's been a lot of comments in the media and psychological industry where they're talking about Facebook and its depreciating effect on happiness, and that people who engage, the more you engage on Facebook, the more miserable you're reported to be, because you're observing your fans' happy lives in real time-ish and realizing that you're looking at a computer screen or a smartphone and not being wonderful like they are.
Yeah.
And that's depressing. So what do you think of that?
Screw you, Josh, and your pretty daughters. I wish I had a lovely wife and pretty daughters too.
Well, I could do without the wife, but,
Yeah, but I mean, I understand the concept. The idea that,
Tommy would get mad.
the idea that, Facebook has made sort of the whole, keeping up with the Johnsons is constant now.
Right.
Right, because it's not just peeking over the fence to see what kind of barbecue they have or what kind of car in the driveway they have, right? It's constant because Facebook is also a lot of it. I use my Facebook predominantly. It seems to be for activism and for hanging out with my friends. Those seem to be the two things that I use it for predominantly. I don't brag about my life. I don't, take pictures of my food. I don't do that kind of thing. But I do notice that a lot of people do. Every time they're always talking about the good things and what's happening in their lives, and it's sort of like a platform from which they project the occurrence in their. You know what I mean? Like what's going on in their life?
Yeah, I think the ratio of joyfulness to misery on Facebook is probably like 10-1.
Yeah.
I know that you're all not all that happy out there.
Nobody talks about the unhappy shit, though. So.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you get the odd friend that's like, and I appreciate that people are, in my social group, they'll be like, you know what, I had a crappy day or whatever, and it gives you a chance to reach out to them and be more connected in that. But if it's like, oh, I'm on this wonderful trip in the mountains, and then tomorrow I'm on this wonderful picnic with my friends, and it's like, okay, well, you don't need me.
It's just, well, for me, I'm kind of, I think kind of in between, I like to see people's happy posts and what they're what their vacations are like, and what their family is like, and all that stuff. And I don't mind when people necessarily complain or talk about how they're having, a crappy day or whatnot, because everybody has those, right? Where I draw the line is if every single post that you have on there is negative and how horrible you have it and just how miserable your life is, it's just like instantly it makes me want to just ignore every time that you post something, right?
Oh, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, I don't begrudge people their happiness. I'm like, I can't be your friend, you're just too gleeful.
Yeah.
It's more that, and it's the lack of dynamicism. if you will. You know, that there's a range of human emotion and experience. Quit cherry picking just all the great stuff.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I have noticed...
Not that I even really necessarily feel that way. I mean, if people are happy all the time, that's great, but it's almost like that there's this feeling of... It kind of comes back to actually something that Tommy said a number of episodes ago, where he's like, I hate people that are like, we have happy, wonderful marriages. And it's not that he begrudges people having happy, wonderful marriages. It's that not all marriages are happy, wonderful all the time. But to project that it's always like that is
like a beauty magazine,
ingenuous, right? It rings false. Yeah. And I think that in our society, and probably more in U.S. culture than Canadian culture, there's this really intense pressure to be happy all the time.
Well, I think part of it is because if you're happy, then, you know, you're successful. And if you're successful, then, you know, people want to be like you. And I think that's kind of what people are, like you said, more so in the US and in Canada. I think that's what people are kind of looking for, is they want people to kind of admire them or look up to them, want to be like them. Does that make sense?
A little bit. I just watched a video there's a weekly video that comes out on Penny Arcade TV called Extra Credits, and it's about these designers who basically talk about the culture of video games. And the most recent episode that they came out with was called Game Compulsion Part 3. They're talking about why people are compelled to play video games, and one of the sort of psychology that they came up with that they're talking about is the idea that people don't have a sense of fulfillment in the greater scheme of things. That, you know, when mankind used to live in little thatched hut villages, if you were a cobbler, you were generally the only cobbler, and if you didn't do a good job cobbling your shoes, it was noticed. You made a difference when you did something. But nowadays, because we've got 6 billion people on the planet, everything is so, you know, decentralized and dissociated from one another. You can be a person on an assembly line who's putting a twist in a piece of wire, and, you know, there's no sort of connection between you and the finished product. If you were to step away, then, you know, somebody else could easily take your place. You're replaceable. You're not important. You don't matter. And that's one of the things.
Got a Jesus-ized whole film.
Yeah, and that's something that our modern culture really lacks. And that sort of sense of fulfillment is where a lot of our happiness is based, right? And sure, you could be, you know, Kevin O'Leary and sitting on the top of the world, or you could be, you know, Joe the plumber and not being super, you know. And if you don't feel. Maybe I'm just running in circles, but maybe if you don't feel like you're doing something that matters, that you have a sense of fulfillment and that, you know, you're important at least to somebody, it's really easy to sort of fall into that hole of I'm not happy because I'm not important.
You're not necessary.
Not necessary. I don't matter.
And I think maybe an added pressure to all that is, you know, you hear these stories of these self-made millionaire college dropout type people, or somebody who gets rich on Kickstarter by something that they turn into a hard hobby, or, you know, an author, and of course everyone's only one tweet away from us these days, right? So, you know, you can look at somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who might be your hero, and if he's not, get the hell off my podcast.
Yeah, really. What are you listening to that
for? But you can tweet him, and, you know, you can hear his thoughts, so to speak, on a daily basis, and you can interact, and then you're like, I will never be so awesome as somebody like that. Not to say that I feel that way, but there's kind of that pressure of, there's this demystification of success and celebrity now, in that they're not this other, right? There's no huge class of superstar. We've done a really good job in our media culture and with technology and whatnot of personalizing our successful people to the point where it raises the bar, right?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, we do seem to have this sort of fascination that if you're not happy, your life has, like, it's like the purpose of your life, the purpose of living is to be happy.
Yeah.
Right? And
I don't want to be happy. I just want to be content.
Yeah. I mean, if you're happy all the time, then you have nowhere better to go. Does that make sense? Right? I mean, it's like you can't have light without the darkness. You can't have love without hate. You can't have good without evil. You can't have happiness without sadness. And if you don't ever feel sadness or contentment, then happiness has no meaning. It has no value. You can't have life without death.
Well, I've really started to reject this idea that I need to be happy and I need to be successful. And, you know, maybe in previous times we would call it the rat race or the hedonic treadmill or whatever, right? Where you're always, well, maybe the hedonic treadmill is kind of something different, where you're always, how can I put this? There's a sense that it doesn't matter what you do, it's always enough. There's this lifestyle inflation that happens when we get more money, but I think there's this lifestyle inflation that happens when we experience prolonged and repeated times of happiness, and that we kind of get addicted to it, and we feel
thrill seekers, right?
Yeah, depressed if we don't have it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, when you're constantly being told that being happy is this normal state, right?
And it's a measure of your self-worth.
Yeah, that if you're not happy, there's something wrong with you, that you're failing at something or whatever. It doesn't make sense to me either. And I don't know if that's because I'm, you know, always fluttering at a relative level of contentment rather than, you know, happiness or sadness. But I mean, I don't know. It's like people seem to think that they have to be happy so that they're not sad. You know what I mean? That you have to laugh to keep from crying. And that's a real sad state of affairs if that's the way your life is.
See, I know for me personally, like, there was a time where I was like that, where I always, I wanted to be happy, and the fact that I wasn't, I always questioned and seriously felt that there was something wrong with me, and that just made me feel even worse. And when I realized that, just simply, to use a cliche here, simply, like, kind of living in the now and appreciating what you have instead of focusing on what you don't have, I find that has kind of allowed me to...
It's okay to be okay.
Yeah, and I've realized that, and I've noticed such a huge difference once I realized that, now I actually am able to be happy, and when those moments happen, really appreciate it and value it, whereas before it'd be like, okay, this is nice, but I want more.
Regretting not being happy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
no, I totally get that.
And I think a lot of it was just learning that there are certain things in my life that I can control, certain things that I can't, and not sweating about the things that I can't. Just accept it as it comes along, and and just try and relax and not focus so much on that, because that just causes stress, anxiety, depression, all that kind of stuff.
I think one of the things that we really need to kind of address is this idea of lifestyle inflation, and I think it's something that Ducky has done quite well in that he doesn't inflate his lifestyle, so he doesn't have to worry about chasing that next piece of cheese type of thing. When we bought our house...
I really like how you just justified the fact that I'm a loser. Thank you, man. I love that.
No, I don't think you're
but I'm not saying
I
you're a
think
loser.
he's actually giving you a compliment.
I'm setting you up as a role model, dude. I really am. And here's my point for it, or my justification for it. We bought our house 5 years ago, right? So we moved into this nice little bungalow. I bought my parents' house, and they moved somewhere else in the city. But quite literally, I mean, Tommy and I used to live in pretty much the same place that you live now, Celine, right? Like, we would have been neighbors 5 years ago. We were in the same complex. And the standard of living, if you will, is different between then and where I am here. I mean, just the income requirements to rent a townhouse versus owning, your own place, and the maintenance and kind of everything else that comes with that is quite different. And we moved to the house because we wanted it, but we were also more economically capable to do it. But it didn't make us economically richer, and it didn't make us emotionally richer to make that move. All it did was allow our lifestyle to inflate. So now, we can get fancy things or whatever, but we actually have to work hard and pay for them. And the question is, do we really need them? Do they actually add any intrinsic value to our lives, or
Because now
is
you
it just
have to
part
make
of
sure that you're meeting your expenses.
right? And that we're maintaining some sort of baseline within the type of social group that owns houses, right? So we have friends that own bigger houses, and they're fancier and they're fancier decorated. And I'm not to say that Tommy and I really kind of chase that, but to a degree, you care more about the color of your walls and what's on them when you own the house versus when you rent the house.
See,
right? Like, because you can't paint where you live.
no, and that's the only reason why I would really actually want to move into something that I owned, is so I could paint it the colors that I wanted to. As far as everything else, as far as not having to worry about maintenance, they come and they do my yard work for me, all that, love it. Don't have to worry about shoveling my sidewalk, none of that. The only thing that I don't like about renting is, well, if for pets, it's harder to find places that will accept them. That's one. And then the other one is just not being able to paint the colors that I want to paint. Other than that, I can't complain.
And I don't think that you and your husband, are any happier than, or less happy than Tommy and I are.
I don't think so.
Like, we've been friends for God knows how long, and I guess what I'm getting at is our finances allowed us to move up from an economic scale, but it hasn't impacted us emotionally or in terms of our self-worth and self-image. And I think that there's this kind of allure that if only I had that, then I could be happier. Right. And it really, really doesn't work that way. And we hear it, and I think that we intuitively know it, but I don't know if we as a society accept it. And that's kind of what I'm saying, is I've personally come to the point where, you know what, I don't want a bigger house. I don't need fancier things. I don't really care about this stuff anymore. I'm actually really content with how my life is, and I'm not going to work 90 hours a week just so I can...
Have a car with other seats.
Yeah, just so I can appear better, appear happier, appear successful. And that's something that you said earlier, Celine, that I kind of want to talk about, is this definition of success. And how do we define success in our society? And I know that for a lot of people listening to this is nothing new under the sun. This is a discussion that goes on all the time, generation to generation to generation. But, I think the three of us were in the same age range, and maybe we're just kind of that point in our life where, hey, you know what, you're 30s, and that, where this stuff starts to become less important, where maybe the glossiness of the lifestyle inflation starts to wear thin.
Unless you're one of those sort of people who, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but it's when you take pleasure in the fact that you see yourself as better than somebody else, right? I mean, if you've got a big house and a pretty wife and a shiny car and lots of money and a gold Rolex, you can look down at the people who are sitting in, their, 2-bedroom townhouses, who take transit. And that, for some people, is how they define happiness, that at least I'm not them.
Right.
I don't know how widespread that is, but I have a sense that sort of the higher you go in that sort of lifestyle inflation, the more you climb over other people on the ladder to success, the more it kind of justifies. When you're in the middle or at the bottom, it doesn't matter that much. But when you're part of the elite few at the top, then that being a member of that elite few is really important, particularly to your identity, because I don't know.
But I guess I've realized that that's an illusion, that you're always in the middle. There's always somebody doing better. There's always somebody doing worse. I don't care if you're a multi-millionaire or a multi-billionaire. There's still somebody out there who's making more money than you are.
Yeah. But I don't know.
Or if you're sitting at home on H, there's still somebody who's got it worse off than you do.
We're starting to see that sort of idea in our guild, though. I mean, our raid guild is doing really well in the new server. We're ranked 9th overall on the entire server. And we're actually tied for 4th place. There's 5 other guilds who are as good as we are. We've got people approaching us now rather than us having to recruit. We're famous enough that they're actually coming to us from word of mouth saying, hey, I want to join. And we sort of now have the sense that we're a real guild. And we've made it now. Things are working out real well. And what do we do to make sure that it stays that way? And I think that's a good corollary for that sort of rat race, called ladder climbing in a social, and that kind of thing. I think that that when you start to put your self-worth or your value or tying your happiness to how many things you have, then you kind of find that those things define you. And I think that's where a lot of this this idea of the better off you are, the more happy you'll be. And we've seen stories, we have songs, we've got whole swaths of literature dedicated to the concept that money can't buy you happiness. And yeah, sure, it can buy you a couple of hookers and some drugs, but that's not happiness.
No, I would agree with that. That is definitely not happiness.
So
you got some weird analogies, dude.
I don't know. I haven't adjusted my coffee yet.
You just want hookers and blow. That's really all you want.
Well, the hookers, babe. Well, not even the hookers.
Okay. Following on the previous point that you made prior to the hookers, the King of Bhutan has been considered a visionary for deciding that he's no longer going to measure the productivity of his country by gross domestic product, which any economist would agree is something of a magical number anyway, and it can be fudged in, oh god, so many different ways. I hated Introduction to Micro and Macroeconomics or Macroeconomics. It was like Chapter 1, this is how the economy works. Chapter 2, okay, everything we told you in Chapter 1, forget about it. This is actually how it works. Chapter 3, okay, remember all that other stuff? Forget about that. I realize economics is more of an art than it is a science, but
it's just
GDP,
people, just individuals spending money. That's all it is.
GDP is a convenient illusion, I think, that we use to drive our culture of success and productivity. And the King of Bhutan said, you know what, this is crap. Really, this is a rat race that only encourages depression and environmental destruction, and it doesn't actually address quality of life. It's quantity of objects, or it's economic quantities is what's being measured. But that doesn't give us fulfillment. So what he's done is said, how can we measure gross national happiness? So that whenever we make policies in our government, that's how we're going to evaluate things, is what is the impact on GNP, not GDP.
GNH?
Or GNH. Well, I knew I got that one. But yeah, so what do you think of that idea? Is, it's a philosophical shift, right? I mean, some people will say that, you're just whining because you're not a rich person and you don't know what true success is.
Well, I think the problem with that is that economics is kind of it's a hard sort of black and white, based on reality and objective thinking kind of thing. You can look at how many cars are produced, right, and you have a solid number, and you can have 3 people look at the same number of cars and have them all agree at the number of cars that were produced, right? And that's why, gross national product or gross domestic product or whatever is used as a benchmark for a country's, economic output. The problem with happiness is that it's subjective, and you can have 3 different people talking about what makes them happy and have 3 different opinions. How do you measure that? How do you measure happiness successfully and accurately and then use it as a benchmark by which to influence government policy? Because what makes one person happy can very well make another person miserable.
Exactly.
Right? And we know that from we've got people who want to ban gay marriage, and nothing would make them happier than to outlaw homosexuality. And if they got their way to be what made them happy, then you would know that there'd be a segment of the population that would not be happy because they would be constantly being persecuted. Right? You've got people who find happiness in religion, and you find people who find happiness in non-religion. And it's just it seems to me that it's kind of an interesting idea, but I don't know how it would work. Because once again, you would have to find some kind of objective metric by which to measure happiness, and you can't do that. I mean, even surveys, you can't just send a survey with the national census and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? Right? Because that's a question that doesn't mean anything.
Well, yeah,
right?
Especially if that survey lands in the hands of a person who, on that day in particular, is not happy. Right? Because that's they're multi-billion. Yeah, their multi-billion-dollar company just lost out on a government contract. Yeah.
So he's come home to kick his 17 puppies, right? and with
you have a sick vision of the world,
right? So somebody who by all rights should be a big producer of gross national product would suddenly be a very low level of happiness. So it's just I can see the merit in what he's trying to do. I just don't think it's practical.
Well, happiness research is something that's relatively new. There is a TED Talk about that I will throw into the show notes. I can't remember the name of it offhand. But there is some move within the academic community to find a way to quantify it as much as possible, given that it is a subjective thing. There is a happiness scale. Eric Weiner, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. We'll go with Weiner. Wiener, sure. Wrote a book number of years ago called The Geography of Bliss, subtitled One Grump's Search for the Happiest Places in the World. And it was actually a pretty good book. I recommend it. So according to the scale, we have Asheville, North Carolina is the world's happiest place, and Moldova is the world's most unhappy place. So what he wanted to do was pick a couple of these countries on the scale, and of course he went to North Carolina and Moldova and talked to these people and kind of try to figure out why their regional culture, why they think they are happy, how do they define happiness, and can you actually move to somewhere and become more or less happy? It was a pretty interesting book, especially the Moldovans. They know they're the world's most unhappiest place, and they're just kind of resigned to it, which is weird. But, maybe that comes down to definitions.
Not like it's going to matter anyway.
Pretty much. It was an entertaining book. You're not going to get any answers out of it. It's just more of an exploration of the question. But can places make you happy?
Disney seems to think so.
I think what it is it's not necessarily the place, it's the people around you. If you surround yourself with happy people, I think that tends to make you happier. And if you're surrounded by people that are kind of down in the dumps negative, then you tend to fall that way as well.
Well, we are social creatures, right? I mean, if you can have somebody that you can laugh with, even the worst situation you can be in can be fun. Mm-hmm. Right?
So it all depends on, I think, definitely just the people that you surround yourself with.
Or is it that people in North Carolina just feel more social pressure to be happy, and therefore they report that they're happier? Whereas the people in Moldova are like, it's life. Yeah. It's, happiness isn't a huge value, so I'm not going to put, maybe when we say we're evaluating geographical happiness, what we're really talking about is evaluating the value system around happiness in those particular places.
Yeah, the culture of people.
Because it thinks to me, it comes to me and knocks on my door and says, hey, may I come into your brains? No, it's
that's where I keep my thinkery-doos.
Give it more juice.
The hamster needs to run faster.
Need more monies. Okay, so the thinking comes, you know what I'm getting at.
You haven't sensed that.
There you go.
It occurs to me that if you live in what is the world's official unhappiest place, and it's such an unhappy place that when you say to your neighbor, are you happy? And he's like, what do I look like, Moldovan? Of course I'm unhappy. Okay, that's like, they probably don't speak like that at all, but...
Racism is funny.
I'm not like high or drunk or anything.
I was just going to ask.
This is just pure unadulterated, William. I've had a nap.
There you go.
But, it seems to me that if you're in the world's most miserable place, trademark, that you would be like, I don't want to be here. Yeah. And that you would want to go to, you would want to migrate somewhere happier, right? If everyone around you is like depressed and suicidal, then...
Yeah, but are they actually depressed and suicidal though, or are they just like... Another goat died.
Well,
whatever.
But that's that's good that you caught me on that, because that's an assumption we make in our culture, right? That if you're not happy, then you're depressed.
And you're one step away
and
from
there's
putting
something
a
wrong
bullet
with
in your
you.
head.
Yeah,
well,
or
in Canada, you're not.
At school.
Well, in Canada, you'd be putting a sword through your arm or something.
A sword?
Kitchen knife.
Really?
Actually, the cops say that the biggest problem that they have when it comes to armed thugs is swords and bats and melee weapons. They have a bigger problem with swords in Canada than they do with guns because swords are unregulated.
That is absurd.
I know.
Oh, jeez.
I don't even...
A couple months ago, one of the
My roommate has a sword on his wall. That bothers me.
Well, I do too, but I mean,
you people stay away from me. I need to put a lock on my brain things.
That's a local 7-Eleven. A couple months ago was robbed by a guy with a warhammer. Right? So, I mean, like an actual warhammer, like a freaking big flat metal post on one end and a big spike on the other, on the end of a long metal stick. Yeah. So, I mean, it's
Oh shit! He's bringing out the trebuchet now.
Yeah,
we're screwed.
That's Canada for you, man. And then the girl behind the counter.
Violence is very medieval.
Yeah, the girl behind the counter pulled out her Morningstar, and it just went downhill from there.
But gives a new meaning to the word mace up north. Eh?
Yeah, but it really does. It doesn't make sense that if those seem to be the only two options, and they're polar opposites from one another, and it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean,
well, then it excludes the middle, the happy middle.
Because if
the content.
If you just go based on kind of like the information that's out there, it's either one or the other. There is no in between anymore.
There should be like that with everything, though, right? I mean, when it comes to, like, there's no sort of happy medium with anything. It's always extreme this or extreme that. Mm-hmm. There's no such thing as, in politics, you're not centrist. You're either right wing or you're left wing, right? Yeah. If you're, you're either smart or you're dumb. You're rich or you're poor, or, you're black or you're white. It's just, you're gay or you're straight. There's no sort of middle ground, and nobody ever seems to recognize that the vast majority of the bell curve is in the middle. Right?
Or it could be a double bell curve.
Whatever,
Yeah,
but the point is that why can't that, why is that sort of the way we look at things? Like, why is it so hard for people to accept that, you may have 10% of the population who's really, really happy all the fucking time, and 10% of the population who's all like, oh, not again, like Eeyore, right? And then you've got the 80% in the middle who are like, some days are good, some days are bad, but overall, I'm happy with it, I'm fine with it. Right?
One of the things that I challenge my students with at the beginning of every semester is to not view the world as so black and white, to realize that there are very many shades of gray. And because
50 shades of gray.
No.
There are 50 shades
more
of
than
gray.
50. But I'm just, and every time that I bring that up, I get, 30 to 40 people looking at me like I have just, snorted like a big line of blow right in front of them, and then told them that they need to do it in order to be accepted. Like, something crazy like that. Like, it just seems like such a foreign concept.
Well, I can kind of see the merit to that, though. I'm a very much a black and white thinker.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly because it's in the gray areas that you sort of justify unjustifiable things.
I guess that's true.
Right, and that's kind of the danger of the gray area, right?
Right, but there's the entirety of human experience is a spectrum. It's not. I mean, you just complained that why do we look left or right, or why are we one thing or not the other? And it's because we don't know how to manage things that aren't concrete opposites.
Yeah.
We don't know how to manage the middle. We've lost that skill.
Yeah.
I see it in people I work with all the time. It's like, if I make a mistake at work, which I rarely do, it's always the customer's fault. But, if I make a mistake at work, then there's that, well, you're just incompetent, you don't know what you're doing. But if I do something that, really well, it's like, you're an amazing wizard, like, how can I, give you my children type of thing. There's, now, clients that I've had for much longer know that I aren't so extreme, but a lot of times I find that when I first meet people, they have this expectation that isn't necessarily high, but their reaction just seems really out of proportion with the outcomes. And it seems very binary to me. Am I making any sense?
A little bit.
Okay. That's important to me. This is a podcast that people listen
Well,
to.
I think it's just, the reason why I find it making sense is just the same thing with my job. If, the way I see it is if I do something a little bit differently and I get the same result, I don't get what the issue is. You know what I mean? Like, just because you do it one way, that works for you, and we get the same result, doesn't mean I have to do it the exact same way that you do it, because that doesn't work for me. And there's a lot of people that I work with, one person in particular, that it's either her way or you're nuts. Like, it just doesn't work.
Well, that's why our education sucks, our education system.
That kind of ties into what we were talking about last week with the process versus concept, right? So,
Elaborate.
well, like, when we teach people the concept of, like, for example, for math, if you teach people what they're trying to accomplish, they can come up with their own process. Whereas if you just teach them the process, then, this is the way you do it, and if you don't do it this way, you're wrong. Whereas this is what you're trying to accomplish, and as long as you accomplish it, you're right. Like, as long as the destination is the same, the path you take to get there shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Well,
I mean, there are situations where it does matter, like, depends on how, if you're,
Well, definitely, I would agree with that, but for the most part.
like, if you become affluent because you work hard and you come up with a good idea and you do it honestly and fairly, as opposed to you rob a bank and don't get caught, I mean, you can't say that both those paths are just as legitimate as the other, but,
No.
Well, here's the thing, though. So I think that we need to say to people what matters is your outcome, and that you need to have freedom in the mushy middle, right, as to how you get there. As long as you're achieving optimal outcomes, you're doing good. But I think we need to be celebrating the process and not the outcome. And it's a bit of a disconnect, because we're saying that, it's important that you be able to, pay your bills and be a good citizen and whatever. And how you get to that point doesn't matter from a process point of view, but from an integrity and character point of view, it really doesn't matter that you are a good taxpayer. What matters is that you're
honest,
a good friend, and that you're of good moral character.
I guess it really depends on what you're trying to judge, because I mean, sometimes it doesn't matter how you get where you're going as long as you get there, and other times it's not the destination but the journey. I mean, that's the dichotomy of the human experience, though. So, right?
One of the there was a article in Skeptic magazine that I read recently, and it was on the 4 domains of truth, and they talked about how we as humans come up with the idea of truth and knowledge, and we do it through mysticism, we do it through rhetoric, we do it through logic, and we do it through empiricism. And I think that we need to be very conscious about how we're viewing the world and how we're viewing processes and outcomes, and which domain and rule set we're using to judge them. And where we see a lot of conflicts, I think, is, if we're trying to make an empirical evaluation of an outcome, then there's one set of standards with which we'll be able to say that this is a good thing or a bad thing, right? It's kind of a binary true or false type of proposition when you're looking at the world empirically. But if we're looking at the process from a rhetorical point of view, then the nuances matter, right?
Maybe you should define
but
what
they
you
don't
mean.
necessarily... Sorry, what do you
Define
mean?
the 4 terms. Like, what do you mean by mysticism? What do you mean by rhetoric? What do you mean by empiricism?
Oh my god, I didn't know I have to actually know what I was talking about. I thought it was a different podcast. Okay, so...
I thought this is called hardly qualified.
There might be some people out there who don't even know what the words mean.
No, that's fair,
Particularly in this context, so...
But it was such a well-written article, I don't know if I can do it justice, but I'll try. So, if not, go to skepticmagazine.com and look it up, but...
What, mysticism is
sell their
like,
articles.
belief in the supernatural. Rhetorical
so-
is, this is what I say, so it must be true. What was the third one?
No, so what they were saying, okay, so... mystical, or the domain of knowledge for mysticism comes from a set of rules based on religion. You can't argue them, they just are, right? And as long as you fit within that particular theological or mystical concept, things are and always will be true. So, Jesus is king. That is always true from a Christian point of view. And you can't argue anything that doesn't work within that frame. You can't say that, Jesus is an ogre, because those are kind of two different worlds that don't clash. So that's kind of more flighty in terms of domain of knowledge. Then you have logic. Now, logic is a system of thought that can almost be expressed mathematically, right? Where things are true, whether they follow, whether you're going back on an idea. If you're making an illogical argument, you can actually map it out on paper, and you can test it, right? When you're making a rhetorical argument, and this is how most of us talk, and this is the whole point behind debate, and our court systems are based on rhetoric. They're not based on, or they're based on rhetorical systems. They're not based on evidentiary systems or empirical systems. So that's where you make more of a argument to emotion and to what feels right, the truthiness of the matter, if you will. That's what rhetoric is about. And then empiricism is what is quantifiable, what is absolutely knowable and testable. So when we think of science, we think of empiricism. That's an empirical truth that we get out of science. When we think of criminal justice, what we're talking about is rhetorical truths, right? So within Western legal tradition, you are assumed guilty until proven...
Wait, I think you got that back. That's only in rape cases.
There you go. You're assumed innocent until proven guilty by a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah. Right, which says that we don't empirically know whether or not you did it, but on the balance of the probabilities, actually that's more civil law, but that, you know what I'm saying, right? So when we're talking law, we're talking rhetorical arguments. When we're talking science, we're talking empirical arguments. There's concrete facts, they don't change, they can be tested. Rhetorical arguments, we move on. Then we have logical arguments. I'm kind of rambling here, so you can shorten that out if you want.
I think you referred to that as the truthiness of it all.
No, that was rhetorical.
Oh, was it?
But basically,
that was
mysticism
rhetorical.
is the belief in God, the sort of the rules or knowledge that are brought down on high and cannot be challenged.
They're religious rules, yeah.
Rhetoric is the emotional aspect of knowledge, what feels right, what sounds right, what sounds like it could be true, or what you feel you know. Logic is what can be philosophically or argued in debate.
And demonstrated.
And then empirical is based off of actual evidence that you can produce and reproduce.
Right. And why I brought that up, I have no idea now. So I think we should take a break, and you know what? George Hrab wants to thank you for listening.
Yay, George Hrab.
Woohoo!
Hi, this is Ducky and William from Hardly Qualified, and you're listening to George Hrab. No, wait, sorry, reverse that. The other way. I'm the Geo, and they're the other people. But you should be listening to it, because it is what it is. HardlyQualified.ca.
So do we know why that I was concerned about the 4 ways of knowing?
Black and white thinking.
Yeah, black and white thinking, right. So it all depends on how we think of an issue as to how we value it. And my point is that when we're trying to decide whether or not something is successful or good, let's just go with good, or whether it's success or happiness or some other metric, we also need to be conscious of how we're determining that, whether or not we're doing it through a mystical or a rhetorical, a logical, or an empirical method. That's kind of what I was talking about. So, because that, for me, I found just thinking like that, saying, okay, the reason why there's a disconnect in between how I'm perceiving this and thinking about it and how this person is perceiving and thinking about it is because they're using a different domain of knowledge to come to their conclusion. That's what I was getting at. So that was the point of my rant, or my wandering. Sorry. Alright, so, what do you think of things like The Secret?
Is that like a book story, or do you mean secret as in an actual secret, like the concept of keeping information hidden from somebody?
The book.
Okay, so The Secret is a book that was made into a film that is basically, comes down to, what's it called? Not self-affirmation, but...
basically, what it is it's...
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, so you're
is it like some of this Tony Robbins bullshit?
No, it's basically what it is you have like just like a basic positive frame of mind that whatever you want, you project that energy out into the universe, and the universe has no reason to say no, that it'll give it to you, it'll find a way to make it happen. However, the trick to it being is you need to be happy and feeling good and positive and loving all the time.
Woo.
Right. And it uses a perversion of metaphysics to try to justify
Woo.
it.
What did he say?
Woo. Woo. It's all woo.
Woo. That might be a bit of an inside term for people, I guess.
Woo is a term used by skeptics to refer to things like, positive thinking. That sort of metaphysical nonsense where if you have the right mindset, it actually affects the outcome or affects reality in ways that we can't,
Right. So things that you'll hear that are wooish are like vibrations. You have good vibrations or bad vibrations.
Or magnetic bracelets that will heal you and, just...
Another concept is energy. I see your energy, or you have good energy or bad energy.
Auras.
This comes into things like Reiki, or touch-based healings, crystal work, stuff like that, where energy is this. Brian Dunning of the Skeptoid Podcast did this great movie. Look it up on YouTube. We'll put it in the show notes. It's free, so it's not pirated or anything. Called Here Be Dragons, and there's a section of it, and it's kind of an introduction to skeptical thinking. That's actually how I got into it. We were shown it in the first class of Controversies of Science, and that's kind of what took me down my skepticism and eventually led to atheism path. So thank you, Brian. But one of the things that he talks about in Here Be Dragons is that there's this kind of perception of energy as this, miasma of perceptible goo that just kind of flows out of you into somebody else, or that it's an actual thing, whereas energy literally means potential work product, right? So you often hear people say, "Oh, well, he's doing energy work," or there's anyway.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. And
I think
there's a
woo. That's gonna sound awesome at Chipmunk speak. Woo.
I think with this, the whole thing with the secret, whatever, people believe what you want to believe. I'm not going to sit there and say you're wrong for it, but I think what it basically comes down to is
they are wrong for it. I'm sorry.
I think,
and I'm making an empirical statement there.
I think what it comes down to, though, is just the whole mind over matter thing. I don't know.
The thing is there's nothing. Well, if you recognize that all of that is subjective, if the idea of energy work, or the idea of Reiki, or the idea of auras, or the idea of crystals and indigo children and all this other nonsense, if you recognize that is all in your head,
mysticism,
then I don't really see too much of an issue with it. The problem that I have is where they make that next jump and say that all this shit in my head has a demonstrable effect on reality as I know it. Right? And that's where the disconnect happens for me. I mean, I don't care if people believe that they can see auras. I don't care if they think they can feel the energy of other people. A lot of the times you can go into, you can tell that the energy of a crowd is different than the energy of a library, right? If you're at a demonstration, the energy, air quotes, energy, is different than if you're at, an opera.
Yeah.
But we could call that atmosphere as well.
Right? And it's just, it's an amorphous term used to describe the sort of situation you find yourself in. But the idea that you then make that next jump that says, that energy can be harnessed, that energy is an actual thing, that energy can be used to produce, to do work like actual energy does. That's the next jump that I have trouble with.
But that's people confusing domains of knowledge, right? Between a mystical view of energy and an empirical view of energy. And they are completely non-compatible.
Yeah.
But if you don't make that distinction, then you don't realize that. So, yeah. So, okay, but we didn't really answer the question.
What was the question again?
What do we think of The Secret?
Oh, what do I think of it?
Yeah. Do you think that there's any basis or any validity, even if we accept that it's woo, and that we don't like woo, at least Ducky and I don't like woo?
I think the whole idea of it is, whatever you ask for, you'll get. I think that is essentially crap. I mean, people, you get what you get because you work for it, right?
Well, not always. I mean, opportunity and does also, circumstance and coincidence do occur. There's that element of random chance, but...
True, I guess. But I guess what it comes down to is the whole...
But a house doesn't spontaneously build itself.
And you're not entitled to it because you think well.
Yeah, well, you're forcing yourself to think in a positive manner. And that itself has positive effects on your body. Because they have done studies...
What does that even mean?
No, because they have done studies that people that have reduced amount of stress, that are a little, have more about happiness, tend to have, are at lower risks for things like high blood pressure, they have lower heart rates, lower respiration rates. They tend to be, their body doesn't have to work, isn't working as hard. Whereas people that are constantly thinking negative, they're putting that stress on themselves, are at higher risk of things like heart attacks, high blood pressures, stroke, higher heart rates, all that kind of stuff. They've done studies on that, right? So
correlation is not causation, so there's a couple of things I would challenge in that. Like, first of all is the idea that there are positive or negative thoughts at all, right? I mean, thoughts are not positive or negative. It's, it's hard for me to sort of accept that there's such thing as, a lot of people will say things like greed is negative, or hatred is negative, or anger is a negative emotion. But it's not. If you're angry about an injustice, it can motivate you to do a positive or beneficial act. I don't understand how thoughts and emotions can be considered negative. So if you have a positive outlook on life, do you mean optimistic when you say positive?
Well, I guess optimistic would be more accurate. accurate, yes.
Okay, and then the other question is how do you know that optimistic outview is what's affecting the physiology? How do we know it's not the other way around? That the optimistic outlook on life is an emergent property of being a healthier person? Right?
It's a good question.
I mean, so the studies that all they represent is a correlation between people who have an optimistic outlook on life have less health issues, right? But the reverse could be the same as well, that people who have less health issues have a more optimistic outlook on life. Until there's a causal sort of direction, which one's the cause and which one's the effect, I think it's hard to say that, positive thinking will make your life better. I think that's just
there's a greater opportunity for it. If you're walking around brooding all the time, people aren't going to be around you. Opportunities are going to be less. You're likely to isolate. There is something to be said for having an optimistic worldview in terms of better outcomes in mental health and success.
Well, and I think where the secret kind of pushes it too far is, again, just kind of the whole you ask for it, you'll receive it type thing, but it also pushes it too far, saying you have to be that all the time. That you always have to be on what they call a positive frequency. Right?
It also sets up a real this sort of unfulfillable sense of entitlement. Like, what's going to happen is people are going to be like, I've been thinking really good thoughts. My brain has been filled with puppies and kittens and fluffy bunnies for the last 2 years, and I still don't have my dream job. What's wrong with me? Why isn't it working out? What am I doing wrong? Why am I so bad? Why does the world hate me? What,
Yep.
And that's the risk, right? That it becomes.
There's that feedback loop that you don't get what you want, and it's because you suck because you're not thinking positively enough. So, it's just.
That's why God doesn't answer prayers, right?
Well, it's the same thing with homeopathy and hate healing and stuff, right? It distracts people away from putting effort into doing things that actually have an effect, right? Thinking positively is not going to get you your dream job, right?
No.
Building connections, getting a good education, having some experience, working hard, that's the kind of stuff that'll get you your dream job. And if you sit, behind a computer screen just thinking, I'm going to get this job, I'm going to get this job, I'm going to catch this job, and then click send on your resume, that's not going to help.
No. And I agree with you on that. And that's why I'm saying that's the part of it that I disagree about, is that if you, what is it, what you think, what's the stupid saying? It's like what you think about, you bring about?
Yeah.
So.
What you put out, you'll get back.
Yeah. I guess what it is too is, another thing that I want to bring into the conversation is how much do you think self-esteem has a part in, how happy a person is?
Well, I think the problem with self-esteem is that a lot of it is manufactured now.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it's hollow.
Yeah.
Right? esteem, self-worth, value is supposed to come from accomplishment, If you don't have the possibility to fail, then your victory doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. Right? And the esteem that you would earn from that victory has no value because you didn't earn it. You didn't have the chance not to have it. And I think that's where we're really sort of running into the problem with this idea that we don't keep score, there's no such thing, everybody's a winner, everybody's special. We're basically teaching people that they should have self-esteem just because, right?
That there's no pride of achievement.
Right, and because of that, when they get out into the real world where achievement actually matters, this is one of the things that a lot of, I run into this concept a lot when we're talking about counter-feminism, that a lot of the times feminists will argue that men don't respect women. And that's not true, right? They'll say things like, men won't respect a woman in the workplace. Right, and they seem to think that that's because of them being women. And that's not true. Women who do well will receive the same amount of respect as a man who does well. Because men in general, and I would hope that people as a group, as a whole, respect achievement. Right? That you, as a person, don't deserve any esteem, any value, any worth until you've proven yourself. Right?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the sort of thing that we're running into, is that a lot of people, particularly the younger generations, which kind of, damn kids, get off the lawn, from last episode, they sort of have this sort of idea that I'm special, I have value, and when they get kicked in the teeth for not doing what they're supposed to do, they have this arrogant pride about them because they've got this inflated, manufactured sense of self-esteem. And an inflated, manufactured sense of self-esteem has no strength against criticism, against challenge, because there's nothing supporting it, right? You need to have the gold standard supporting the currency of self-esteem, or else it has no value, right? Whereas somebody who's done something with their life, who has an actual achievement that they can look back on and say, I did good, nobody can take that away from you, right?
That's true.
There's this idea that, or whatever, there's this thing, we'll call it a thing, concept, thank you, and it goes that once a metric becomes a target, it becomes useless. Mm-hmm. So when we're trying to look at people's ideas of mental health and self-worth, we've come up with this concept called self-esteem, and we've started measuring it, and we realized that maybe it wasn't as ideal as we thought it was, so we've engineered a mental health industry, an education industry, an entertainment industry that focuses on reinforcing positive ideas of self-esteem. And so what we've done is now we've distorted it. Whenever you're measuring something, you almost got to take a sideways glance at it. You can't let it catch your attention too long, otherwise you'll become fixated on it, and your interaction with it will cause it to distort and inflate or deflate, and then it becomes worthless, right? So we see this in things like hospital wait times. Well, hospital wait time doesn't tell us anything about the quality of care in a hospital. All it does is it allows politicians to say we've shaved 15 minutes off of hospital wait times. Well, that's great, but now people are dying 10 minutes faster. So
Woohoo!
that type of thing, right? Okay, so that was maybe a little depressing and somewhat off topic.
But no,
but
that's
my
true.
point being is, we value self-esteem. Well, why? We don't even really know what it is. It's how we can define it as how good we feel about ourselves. So that's an incredibly subjective thing. Why do we necessarily need to increase it? Why does it have to have any degree of importance? It comes back to what I was talking about earlier, that we have this idea that there's no happy medium anymore. We can't just be okay. I'm okay with being okay now. For years, I wasn't. It used to bother me that I wasn't as joyful or as ecstatic or as happy as everybody else, but we forget we're only seeing them in those moments. These are glimpses of exceptionalism, right? That's why we have a word called happy, because otherwise it would just be normal.
Yeah.
Right? And it's no longer okay to be normal. We have to be exceptional. We have to stand out in society. We have to be a great contributor or a great creative person, or we have to get promoted really quickly in our business, or we have to make a lot of money, or we have to be academically excellent. And I'm not saying that striving for excellence is a bad thing, because I don't believe that. But I think defining your self-worth and basing your emotional health off of your self-worth in that respect is really damaging.
Well, if you guys have seen The Incredibles, have you guys seen The Incredibles?
Yes.
Yes?
Okay. Remember the villain whose whole purpose of the thing is to give everybody superpowers?
Yeah.
And what's his justification?
I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Because when everybody is special, then nobody is special. And I think that's really where we're running into right now, is that if all we're doing is with this inflation of self-worth, of happiness, of that it's not okay to just be okay, you have to be exceptional, you have to be brilliant, you have to be the top of your class. There's always going to be somebody who's better than you, and there's always going to be somebody who's worse than you. It doesn't matter how good you are, whatever you do, there's going to be at least one other person who's better than you. And this sort of idea that we all have to be at the top doesn't work, because if we're all at the top, then no one's at the top. Right? It's just sort of...
Well, and this is why Twitter is such a dangerous thing for our self-esteem, because we can talk to the people at the top, and then there's this kind of equal relationship. You know what I think really needs to happen is our media culture, and maybe this is why tabloid magazines and things like Entertainment Tonight and so on are so important to the mental health of our culture, is that we need to know that these exceptional people are normal and that they fail and they're miserable just like the rest of us.
I think, though, maybe tell me if you disagree with this, but I think we need to have exceptional people to be able to look up to, though. Does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah, it does. But I think we as a society need to be... It's like they say that the best leaders are the people who don't want to be leaders, right? The best generals are the people who don't want to fight. Right? The sort of idea that...
There's a reluctance.
Yeah, anybody who... we all need to have somebody that we can aspire to be like, but we should never aspire to be somebody that other people aspire to be like. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? We should never want to be a role model, but we should always want to have a role model.
Yeah.
And ideally, I think you want to make sure that the role models you do have are people who don't want to be role models.
I would agree with that.
Does that make sense?
Because then they might abuse it, or...
Well, yeah, because...
I mean, that sounds true.
Well, yeah,
it
does.
True,
It's because...
but I want you to justify it.
Well, it's because a lot of the people who seem to want to be leaders, who want to be in charge of things, who want to be, the arbiters of morality or whatever, because they want to, they have a vested interest in it, and that corrupts them.
So are you saying that because I want to be a good podcast host and I want the podcast to be successful, it's going to suck and be...
No. What I'm saying is that if you want to be the best podcast host and have other podcasters look up to you, if you want to present yourself as the standard of being a podcast host...
No, there's no hope
right,
for that.
Right. I mean, the idea that you want to be what other people want to be like. Right? That you want to be the person to set the standard. You want to be the person...
there's that element of narcissism.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And that's why you find that people who want to be in charge are usually the worst people to be in charge. Because the reasons they want to be in charge are for all the wrong reasons. That's why, one of the overriding themes in a lot of the fiction that I read is that leadership is reluctant, and the best leadership is reluctant. Right. And whether
is that why we end up with bad politicians?
That's how you end up with bad politicians, because they're people who want to. You start out with sort of.
But then that means that there's no good politicians. It doesn't follow.
Well, that's true, right? I mean, a lot of the times you'll find people who, if their motivation is sort of, I have to be a politician so that we can have these problems solved, but because nobody else can do it, it kind of... I mean, it's like when other people start looking up to you or start following your instructions or start seeing you as their source of authority without you having to tell them or enforce upon them or impress upon them that you are the source of authority or that you're the role model or whatever. You know what I mean?
Not letting it get to your head?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm just articulating it badly, but I think Celine understands what I mean. That
I understand what you mean, too. I just wanted to be able to speak it, right? I mean, it's one thing to say we all kind of know, but maybe there's a hole in this argument somewhere, and that's why I want you to make it.
Well, it seems to me that the people who want to be leaders are generally the worst ones to be leaders. Usually because their motivations are selfish in nature.
Maybe, but I think there's still an exception to that. Of that, I think people who want to lead can still lead effectively and well. But I think that if people are doing it just for the glory or for the status, then that's probably where this problem.
That's why we use the term reluctance, right? That rather than you aspire to be a good leader, you accept that you're a good leader. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Right? I mean, I'm reading a book series right now called The Wheel of Time, and there's one character in it named Perrin, who's a blacksmith. And for the last 13 books, he's sort of having this authority thrust upon him that he just doesn't want. He's been raised by the people of his village as the lord of their village. They come to people who are, 40, 50 years older than him, come to him for judgments and advice. And he's just like, you're old enough to know this shit. You would be telling me what to do if you hadn't decided that I'm the lord of the two rivers. Right? And the whole sort of story about Perrin's evolution is this idea that he's resisting being the leader. He's not a lord, he's just a blacksmith, and he doesn't understand why these people are seeking to him for leadership. And because of that, he's one of the best leaders there are.
But isn't that just a romantic idea? I mean, it makes for a great story and everything, but when we're talking about, say, city council or something, don't we want people who are qualified, that they know how to read a balance sheet, and they know how to look at law, and that they have some sort of background and training in that?
Yeah, I know, but I mean, when you have people who have that ability, then we seek them out. They don't seek out the position. Right? Like, I mean, that's the point that I'm trying to make, that when we look at people, when we're looking for leaders, we're looking for the people who can do the job well, not for the people who say, follow me. Right?
Okay.
You look for the people who just go ahead and do shit, who have the capabilities, and then,
So kind of like our mayor, the head mentioned,
I was just going to say.
harassed by his friends and colleagues to run.
Yeah.
And, only kind of did it at the last minute because he's like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
And he's been exceptional at it, I think, anyway.
Yeah, I think
at least
so.
notably more so than previous mayors.
Yeah. Well, and I was just going to, it's funny that you brought him up because I was just going to use him as an example as well.
Right? Like the reluctant hero, The general who doesn't want to go to war is usually the best one to win a war, Because their priorities are different.
So let's step this back, and how can you relate this to happiness? Be reluctantly happy?
Well, I mean, the idea of, living your life to be happy is sort of silly, because being happy, I think, is an emergent property of having a good life. It's not the other way around, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It's an effect, not a destination.
Yeah, right? I mean, it's a side effect of having a good life. And for each of us, a good life is different than what it would be for the other, which is why it's really hard to sort of judge your happiness against another person's happiness. And that's even considering that's considering happiness as a scale, right? Not as a, I am happy, end product, right? Happiness is a scale. You have, miserable on one end, completely unsatisfied, and incredibly satisfied and ecstatic at the other end, right? So,
Okay.
I don't know.
What do you say, Celine? What are your final thoughts on this idea?
I don't know. I think it's, people that say, I think I'm in line with Ducky on this. It's just people that say things like, I choose to be happy. I think they're setting themselves up for unhappiness in a way. If that makes any sense, just because you've set that bar, and that's, so everything has to be up there. And if you're not there, then that's just going to cause you to feel bad about yourself, bad about what you're doing, all that kind of stuff. I think the one book that I read that kind of talks about that, sort of, in a way, is it's a book called The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. And it's just this, it's this woman who lives in New York who decided, sitting on the bus one day, that she didn't feel like she was happy. And that what she did was she decided that she was going to dedicate a whole year of her life to her happiness project. And she came up with all these rules and what she called commandments and all this stuff and tasks that she had to complete each month and add on to it each month. It was just a whole bunch of work that in the end, she said it did increase her happiness a little bit, but not a whole lot. And I don't think in order to be happy, I don't think you need to put in all that work. I think it's just something that happens as a result of something. Yeah.
Like you said, happiness should not be the goal.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. It should just be something that happens naturally, organically. And I think when it happens that way, I think it's worth so much more than working your butt off, stressing yourself out, only just to say, yes, I'm happy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
I think it does.
It's manufactured happiness.
Yeah, and it doesn't have as much value. And I think that's where what a lot of people just don't understand is they have this pressure put onto them by, society, culture, whatever you want to call it, to be happy all the time. And I think, part of me...
So maybe this American ideal of the pursuit of happiness is more of a curse than it is.
Well, yeah, actually, you and I were talking.
Because it's that word of that pursuit. You have the right to be happy, but you might want to think twice about chasing it down.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's what you and I were talking about before we started recording was on the cover of Time magazine, actually, the one that's out right now, is an article. I didn't get a chance to read it. I should have purchased it, but it was talking about, the pursuit of happiness and the effect that it has on, the American culture. And, is it really something that's making people happy, or is it just making them miserable?
Well, it leads to lifestyle inflation. That's, we see these happy people on TV with these large houses, and we don't realize how something even like that type of media messaging impacts us until we looked at, the average American house has gone from 1,200 square feet to 2,400 square feet in the last decade, and that's largely because of this media influence and projection of happiness with the things that we own.
Well, that's also a fundamental difference between America and most other Western cultures, is that for most people it's life, liberty, and security of person. But security of person doesn't exist in the States. It's pursuit of happiness, right? Those are their three, it's their holy triumvirate, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
No, give me good government any day, that's what I say. That's the Canadian way.
Give me good people and we won't need good government.
I hear you.
So, but, yeah.
Well, I think that, we probably haven't said anything that we don't already know, but sometimes it's just worth talking about and worth hearing again. Kind of a course correction. I know for me in my life, it's been a big message lately that I've been talking about with friends, and I've just come to the realization that wherever I am on the ladder, I'm good. I'm getting off, and when my friends and family say you look depressed or whatever, it's like, no, I'm not chasing the drug anymore. I'm good. Don't pursue happiness. Just pursue life, and if you find happiness is chasing you off to the side of your vision, then you're doing something right.
Happiness will come to you. It's not the goal. It's a side effect.
Exactly.
Yeah. Measure it through that sideways glance, people.
Yes.
So, and we'll see you next week. Taking us out, it's Laurie Matheson, and the title of the song is Beauty Grace Heart.
Ashes and burnt fingers, well, the fire is out, but the smoke lingers, and you're too young for blackened lungs, so hold your breath a while. Count to 10, shake the branches, might lose a limb. Take your chances, baby birds crane necks for worms and never get their wings. But who wants vultures to sing when they trade their kindness in for greed? They're not long to dance the steps of thieves, but yours is not to agree with your beauty, grace, and heart on sleeve. Waking up to disaster strikes fear in hearts. It cracks plaster, and that's no way to start your day. Facing with a smile, despair's a pit. What does it matter when you've got your wins set? A good ladder and rung by rung till climbing's done. Bad luck's in its face, your boot heel in its face. Summer's end is marked by falling leaves. Winter's grip gets tighter by degrees, but yours is to believe with your beauty, grace, and heart on sleeve. When they trade their kindness in for greed, they're not long to dance the steps of thieves. Summer's end is marked by falling leaves. Winter's grip gets tighter by degrees, but floating on the breeze is your beauty, grace, and heart on sleeve. Heart on sleeve. Heart on sleeve.
Thank you for listening to Hardly Qualified. Remember to check the website at hardlyqualified.ca for news, updates, references, and to learn how to support the podcast. Please review and rate us in iTunes after each episode to help get the word out. If you're a Facebook user, like us, and share with your friends and enemies at facebook.com/hardlyqualified, where you can also join in on the conversation. A special thanks to the artists who have donated music to the podcast. We greatly appreciate your work. As always, artists may be found in each episode's reference section. Again, thanks for listening, and remember, knowledge starts with questions. Don't fear them. We'll see you next week.
Taking us out is Laurie Matheson with Buse Grady. Not Grady. Taking us out is Laurie Matheson with Buse. Jesus. What is wrong with my speaking parts today? They're not working.